Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today on the Exploitation Assessment and Pathway webinar. My name's Katie Story-Young. I'm the Exploitation and Missing Team Manager for Warsaw Council. Just to say, I am working from home, as I'm sure a lot of you are, so if you can hear anything, perhaps you might hear my dog, or I've got builders here today, bear with me. Hopefully you won't, but just to kind of throw that in. There isn't anything within this webinar that is kind of confidential or kind of quite scary, so don't worry, there's no need to be watching this kind of with your headphones on or whatever in a safe space. Hopefully you'll be able to kind of watch this at home or wherever it is that you're working from right now. But I just kind of wanted to go through with you our new exploitation assessments, what it looks like, how we've got here, and what we will do with it when we've received it from you. So thank you for joining me today to talk about it. Exploitation isn't going away in Warsaw. It's still very much an issue that we are seeing being presented for victims, be they young people or adults. So the first thing to say, which is really exciting for us, is this exploitation assessment is an all age assessment. So what that means is it's not just for children up to the age of 18, and it's not just for adults over the age of 18. It's for anybody that lives in Warsaw, which is a new way of working, and it's quite exciting. So that's something that this assessment has that we haven't had before. And there are a lot of reasons why we've pulled this together. Some of it is that over the COVID period, as you'd imagine, work has changed, and it's allowed us to really look at what we're doing in terms of exploitation and how we can support victims. And what we've noticed during COVID, as I'm sure a lot of you have, is that the work that we're doing around exploitation has changed in lots of different directions. So hopefully the new assessment will support us with that. This assessment is for all forms of exploitation. So we used to just have a CSE screening tool, and then we had a kind of criminal exploitation screening tool, which also did CSE. But this exploitation tool or assessment is for all of that, okay, which includes some of the more Warsaw specific exploitation that we're seeing, and also includes trafficking of victims as well. Okay, so it's a real kind of contextual safeguarding assessment that looks at not just victims, but also hopefully those who are supporting victims, so parents, carers, and partners too. So the other thing to talk about is the fact that this tool has been built with multi-agency partners. It's not just kind of our team sitting down thinking about what it is that we need. It's been built together with police, health colleagues, colleagues from the voluntary sector, such as our partner street teams, and partners from social care, both children and adults as well. So it's a true multi-agency tool, and it will be reviewed ongoing. So really wanted to kind of say, this is the tool we've come up with. It is a starter for 10. We really hope you like it, and really hope the way that you like working with it. And the reason that it came up is because the screening tools that we had previously, we had a lot of feedback directly from practitioners, and that was practitioners working across the multi-agency partnership who didn't feel that it was robust enough. I certainly didn't feel it was robust enough. What it basically did was just allow us to tick boxes about how vulnerable a person was. It didn't actually look at the exploitation of a victim. And this tool, you will see, is a 12 kind of open questions asking us for intelligence and information to support a victim. So it is very different for you. And the idea is that we've kind of set this new tool into our pathways. So it'll be working in our new exploitation hub, which we're about to launch. It's a new way of working with MASH, and it's a new way of working with adult social care as well. So this tool is hopefully going to be really good for us. Don't worry, there is going to be some guidance notes available. I've kind of written them, and they'll be on this website. So they'll be on the Warsaw Safeguarding Partnership Board website. So do have a look and take some notes if you need to, okay? There will be some new stuff here for you, but it's not going to be done in isolation. You know, come back to us at any time if you need some more information, and we'll give you the contact details from the team throughout this webinar. But the point of which to say at the moment, I will say this a number of times through this webinar, if you're working in your agency around exploitation, it's really important that you work with your manager and tell your manager that you are going to complete this assessment tool. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail further on in the webinar. But hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour as to why we've got the new assessment and what we will do with it when we have it. So this is the first part of the assessment tool. It's basically just a statement that says where you should send it to. So you would send it directly to the Missing Exploited Children address at warsaw.gov.uk. Now that address is for both children and adult victims, okay? It's just the address we have in the hub at the moment. It's just the address that we are using for this tool as the referral routing, okay? So we would ask that you complete this tool and send it straight to us as the exploitation team. We may review this tool and feel that you need to do a MASH referral as well. So we will talk to you if you need to do that. The other point to mention is if you have an emergency, okay, so if there's something in this tool that's really important, for example, if you know that a child has gone missing overnight, okay, don't complete the form and then send it to our team. Please speak to the police first. So if you know that a crime is being committed or if you know that a crime is going to take place, please contact the police prior to completing this assessment. Okay. So question 1 of 12 is, who is this assessment about? Which seems pretty self-explanatory. Who are we talking about here? Who is the victim that you as the practitioner or person knows? So we're talking about the victim here, and we're talking about their address and their date of birth and all the stuff that we would usually kind of take from you, but there's some additional stuff in there as well. So are they known as another name, for example? Do they have a street name? Do they have an alias? And are we aware if this person has any additional needs, either diagnosed or otherwise? And the reason that we ask that is we're finding that a lot of exploited people within Warsaw do have additional needs. Often they're not diagnosed, but as practitioners, we recognise that those needs are there. So it's really important that from the get-go, we understand what this person is about, okay? Next question is, are they accessing education, training, employment? And again, this isn't so that we can kind of call up somebody's employer and ask them about, you know, you have a young woman who's 25 working for you. This is about understanding who the victim is and what safeguarding, if any, we can put into place. It also allows us to kind of pull together or track any themes around specific employment or training placements, or indeed any schools that we can work with as a partnership. So really important that we put that in. The next question asks about a victim's family composition or support network. Okay, so we don't need reams, just really interested perhaps who they reside with. Is it that a victim lives with their partner? Is it that a victim lives with their family, with 6 siblings? It really gives us a good flavour of what family composition is currently in place. And the next question is around, is this person open to a support network in any way? Could it be early help? Is it that they're open to a social worker? Is it that they're open to a care or support provider? So if they are they open on a plan? It's just good to note it there. So if there is a lead professional already involved, we can then touch base with them as the exploitation team, should we need to in the future. Okay. So question 2 is about you. Is about you, the referrer, the person who's making this assessment in, and it's about consent. And as we know, we do need consent to work with victims, but sometimes getting consent around exploitation is hard. And we took a lot of feedback about this when we designed this assessment about consent. And potentially getting consent from the victim of exploitation is difficult and can then put them in a more vulnerable position. But it's important that we do try and have that discussion around gaining consent, okay? And the reason being is I would much rather, as a person, know that somebody was going to make a referral about me than hear it from a police officer or from a social worker or from a voluntary sector agency, you know, kind of a few days down the line. So do think about consent, and do think about how we use it. So there's an opportunity to talk about it in the form, and there's an opportunity for you to talk about other professionals who also you may have consulted during this assessment. So I did speak earlier about speaking to your manager. Perhaps you've consulted with them and thought that it was a good idea to put this assessment in, or perhaps this particular person is working with somebody, perhaps in probation or youth justice, and you may have had a conversation with them to find out more information. In fact, in many ways, that's really useful. So if you want to pop on the form who that other professional is that you've spoken to, that really gives us a good idea of who's speaking about this victim. So do put your contact details on there and let us know if the person knows that the referral is being made. Thank you. Okay, so question 3 is, how is this person being exploited? And we've made all of the questions within the assessment open-ended, okay? So you can free flow, type in the text box how you feel this person is being exploited. Is it that this person's being groomed for perhaps drug running? Is it that this person has been groomed perhaps to use their property for drug sale? Or perhaps we've had a lot of people groomed for sexual exploitation, okay? So we need you to tell us at this point how the person is being exploited. And it's important that you put as much information about this situation and or any evidence that you have within this assessment. So you'll hear me talking about information and evidence as two very different things. And information is something that, you know, perhaps has been told to you by another professional, or is information that perhaps you know about a person. For example, you know, perhaps they've been in a relationship for the last 2 years. That's information, okay? Evidence is very different, and what we're asking you to do throughout this assessment is be evidence-based and evidence-focused. So if you know, for example, that a child is being exploited, what evidence do you have that you can share with us at this point? And it could be perhaps this person has made a disclosure to you, okay? So it's really good to have the kind of fine detail of what evidence that you have as a practitioner about how this person is being exploited. Okay, so question 4 is, what does the exploitation look like? Okay, again, another open-ended question. And we're asking you to think about, at this point, do you know who is exploiting this person? Is it a singular individual? Is it a group of people? You know, what evidence do you have and what information do you have about any potential perpetrators? And this is the part that's really, really useful. So what does the exploitation look like? Well, I know that there's a male called John who has been collecting Katie Story Young from a local shop, and I consider him to be exploiting her because, okay? So do be evidence-based, do share any information you have around the perpetrator at this point. And what we're trying to do is be as perpetrator focused as we can throughout this assessment. And reason being is we don't spend enough time talking about who is exploiting victims in Warsaw, and we really need to be focused on that. So perhaps you've got car registration numbers. That's really useful. Perhaps you've got telephone numbers, or perhaps you know that John, for example, uses Snapchat to groom young girls, okay? Any information like that is really useful in the what does the exploitation look like question. And the next question is pretty self-explanatory. I don't need to go into this in detail, but locations are really important, and they're a real opportunity for us to link together how victims may potentially know their perpetrators, how perpetrators are in particular locations and grooming victims, okay? So even partial addresses are useful. And I'll give you a good example of that. If, for example, somebody's told you that they spent the weekend in a flat, and it could be they've been exploited for sexual exploitation, okay? Just having a small detail around that flat, so it could be that it had a blue door and it was right by the bus station in Warsaw, okay? That information is really useful to some of our police colleagues. So it might be that even if you just have partial information about location, this is where you add it in. And it doesn't have to be just about Warsaw. It could be that we have children, particularly children and young adults who have been groomed for county lines type activity. You will have heard this before if you've seen the exploitation webinar or heard the exploitation podcast. And they're perhaps groomed and moved to different locations. They're trafficked to different locations across the UK and forced to sell drugs. This is a great place to talk about that. So perhaps they're moving through, I don't know, kind of New Street Station in Birmingham, and then they're getting a train down to Exeter, for example. This would be the point you tell us about those locations. Is there any historical information? Now, this is important. It's not always the thing we think about with exploitation, but you know, if we're working with a victim and perhaps there's a lot of research, particularly around children who have become gang affiliated, have been groomed to be drug runners. There is evidence within research currently that suggests that children who've witnessed domestic abuse within the household are more vulnerable in terms of becoming potentially groomed by perpetrators. And lots of kind of different reasons for that. If there's domestic abuse happening within the household, perhaps, you know what, as a young child, I don't want to be in that household. And so potentially I may start to go missing, for example. Perhaps as a victim of sexual assault previously, I may not have kind of spoken to the police about that. Perhaps I've been groomed by the perpetrator of sexual assault previously and now kind of been exploited for criminal and sexual exploitation as an adult, okay? So some stuff is really useful to share as a practitioner that you think is important, particularly if it's about a traumatic experience, because as we know, you know, kind of being a victim of trauma does have significant impacts moving forward in the future. So it's about being victim focused and being trauma informed. And if there are significant events such as domestic abuse, either witnessing it or being a victim of it, and or kind of sexual assault, it's important to share it so that we're not asking the victim to keep resharing and re-traumatizing some of that. It's also kind of good for us as practitioners to understand any perhaps childhood experiences that the victim may have lived through that may have an impact as to why they've been groomed by a particular perpetrator. For example, if there's a perpetrator within the local family community that is known to the victim, perhaps there was a kind of previous trauma related to that perpetrator, it's good to be able to make that link. Next question, what's working well? What strengths or protective factors are currently aware of? And this kind of comes down to, we know that there are a lot of victims of exploitation who have some really good bonds and relationships with friends, for example. And some really protective factors such as really good relationships with education placements, and or really good relationships with people like probation and youth justice services, or we have some really good relationships with substance misuse workers. Perhaps they, as a victim, will always attend their substance misuse practitioner appointments. And that's a real kind of protective factor because we know that that happens every Thursday. We know that that victim is really well engaged with that service. And we know that actually this victim's got some real strength here. And this is something we can really support that victim with at this point. So it's something that perhaps look at being strengths focused, look at, what's working really well for this person at the moment, and what can we do to support them further if we need to within your assessment. Question 8 is something that us as a partnership, our multi-agency partnership, we're really keen on including, and that's the voice of the victim, the voice of the person that we're making this assessment about. And kind of going back to the assessment question, we should always be victim focused. We should always be victim focused, and we should always believe what victims tell us. Okay, we know that. I think what often happens is we forget that we're writing a tool or writing an assessment that includes the victim of exploitation, and having an opportunity to talk about abuse and having an opportunity to talk about how they're being exploited is really important. Okay, we know that from research, we know that in terms of contextual safeguarding. Where does a person feel safe? How does a person feel about their perpetrator? They may not feel that they're being exploited by their perpetrator, and so this is an opportunity for them to talk about that. Okay, how would they describe their current lived experience? It's really important. And how important is it that they're involved within this process? So do talk to the people that you're completing this assessment about, unless it puts them at serious harm. Okay, generally speaking, this could be something that you go back to, having completed the assessment, submitted it. You can always come back and speak to the person about this assessment. You can capture the voice of the victim at any time during exploitation assessment. Okay, and the voice of parents and carers is so important. What we know about parents, carers, and partners for those adults who are victims is that often they are a safety net for victims, and we know that parents and carers are our safeguarding partners in terms of exploitation. So there's been a lot of work done with local agencies such as street teams, social care, and also there's the national organisation PACE, Parents Against Child Exploitation. There's been a lot of research that concludes around this, and exploitation is a very different safeguarding concern. So it's not a parenting issue. Parents aren't exploiting their children or their kind of older children. Parents and carers need support at this point too. So this is a point of which we can speak to parents and carers. Are they aware of your concerns? Okay, if you're making an assessment and you're sending it into the team, we will ask you this very pointedly. Do the parents and carers know that you've made this assessment? Okay, because how can we expect parents and carers to safeguard their children if they're not aware of concerns? And historically, there's been a lot of discussion around whether particularly children should be on child protection plans if they're victims of child protection. And the reality is that child protection looks at care within the home. It doesn't look at contextual safeguarding. It doesn't look at the groomers and the perpetrators that are exploiting them out in community. So very different way of working, and it's really important that we speak to victims' families and primary caregivers to see how they're supported and to see if they're understanding of what exploitation looks like. We have seen cases where families have also been groomed, and it's really important to get an understanding of that. Okay. Does this person have friends or peers you're concerned about? And we see a lot of peer-on-peer exploitation for a number of different reasons, because you know what, if I'm going to get exploited and I go to this party and I kind of am aware that something potentially very nasty is going to happen because I've been groomed that way, me taking a friend along is a lot easier. Okay, there's a lot of work happening around peer-on-peer exploitation. And I want us to be mindful of that in this question. So are your victims linked to a group? And it could be a local estate, for example. It doesn't necessarily have to be a gang. It doesn't necessarily have to be a kind of named group. Okay, so while they link to a group, it could be a flat, for example. It could be a flat that's been cuckooed and is being used for drug misuse. Are they linked to other adults or children within this connection? And or do they have any gang affiliation? Now, we know that in Warsaw we have a lot of out of borough gangs moving into Warsaw for drug sale, and perhaps we have a named gang that our victim is affiliated to. If you're aware of that name, put it on the form here. Okay, so tell us about any links or peers that you have. Perhaps, you know, it is important, and it's really important to be mindful that people know people. Okay, so if I live on a particular road and I know 3 other people on that road, doesn't necessarily mean that they're exploiting me or I'm exploiting them. It could just mean that I know them because I live on the same road. It could just mean that I know these people because I live in the same hostel or the same semi-independent accommodation, or perhaps I go to the same school as other children. So it's really important that we evidence their connection. It could be they go missing together. It could be that we've seen them at appointments together. Okay, it needs to be more than simply I go to school at the same place as somebody else. Okay, so this is a point to really think about that. And moving on to risk assessment now. Previously, we've kind of spoken these terms: high, medium, and low, or serious, significant, and other. Okay, or no risk. And we've tried to. We had a lot of conversation with practitioners across multi-agency teams to talk about this. But what we want to be really clear about is what we're evidencing here as part of the assessment. So you shared all of your intel, all of your information and evidence. What is your rationale? Take responsibility for thinking about a risk assessment at this point. Okay. I'm not a big fan of using the term high, medium, or low, and it's something we will look at in the future. But just to get everybody, because I know that some practitioners out there like to kind of understand, is this high, is this medium, is this low? And a lot of people, particularly in MACE meetings previously, have spoken in that kind of language. But what does high, medium, and low look like? Well, low is evidence of vulnerability to exploitation. So we recognise that this victim is actually really vulnerable right now. Perhaps they've gone missing recently. Perhaps they're addicted to smoking cannabis, for example. We have a lot of people who are being debt bonded through cannabis use right now, as we are nationally and kind of regionally. But you know that there's no evidence at this point that they're being exploited. Now, on the previous screening tools, there were a number of tick boxes that would tell you is this high, medium, or low. But actually, what we're asking for here is your professional opinion, which is really important to us. Okay. So is there evidence that this victim is being groomed or targeted for the purposes of exploitation? So we're asking to really think about this. Has this person purposely been groomed online? Has this person been groomed or targeted because of where they live for exploitation purposes? Have they been groomed or targeted perhaps because they have a learning disability? Okay, or they're autistic. I have a lot of children and a lot of adults as well who have different diagnoses and can then be exploited by perpetrators. Is there evidence that this person is being exploited right now by somebody? Okay, so really think about that. Tick the box that you think is important, and that's the only tick box on the form, I'm really pleased to say. And question 12 is, what is your rationale for this assessment? So you've ticked low, medium, or high, or, you know, there's definitely evidence here this person's being targeted. There's definitely evidence here that this person has been groomed and is or being exploited. We're asking you to tell us why you think that, okay? What information do you have that suggests why you've ticked that box, okay? Now, as we know, you know, there's a lot of discussion around professional opinion. You know, we used to, again, hear this in a lot of kind of MACE meetings around sexual exploitation. I don't feel there's enough evidence within this form, but my professional opinion suggests that this person is being exploited. And this is also an opportunity for you to do that. We listen to practitioners and we understand there's a lot of research around this right now. Something doesn't feel right. My gut feeling right now is this person's being exploited. And I'm just going to write that in this assessment because I feel. Now, it could be that I come back to you and say, you know what, where is the evidence that I'm looking for? I hear that you've got a professional opinion, but we do need to be evidence focused. So write in here your thoughts and feelings about the assessment as a professional. And that then is the end of the assessment. So 12 open questions, 12 kind of opportunities to tell us how you feel a victim is being exploited. Okay, and that's the end of the form. It's a Word document. It will be uploaded, so you'll be able to see it along with the guidance, and that will be released as of the 18th of September. Okay, but as I kind of said earlier, what I alluded to, things to think about with this form, and what do we do with this form once you've sent it to us? Okay, so before you complete the form, speak to your manager directly. Exploitation cannot be dealt with in isolation. I genuinely mean that. Don't complete this form, tick the kind of risk assessment, and then place it on file. Do share it with us, okay? Even if it is that you don't have the evidence that this person is being exploited or is as currently labelled low risk, do share it with us, because it may have intelligence there that us as a team and the multi-agency partnership can build upon. Okay, so do talk to your manager about it and kind of share with them that you're going to put the assessment into us. If you're unsure of anything, if you need to just double check, send us an email directly. The email address is on the front of the form. You can see it, and we will come back to you. Please note, we're not an emergency duty team, so we don't work weekends. And if you send us something after 5:15, it will be looked at the day after. Okay, which is why I've put on there, if it is an emergency, contact the police. Okay, exploitation has a number of different crimes around the outside of it that really should be looked at by police. Please do not wait to put in assessments, and do not wait or send it directly to a particular coordinator on their personal email address. Always use that duty address that I've put in. If, for example, particularly at times like this, we've got a worker who's off sick, it's really important that it goes through to our duty email address. All of the notes from today, hopefully you've made some of your own, will go on the Walsall Partnership website, and you can view them at any point, download them, have a look at them. There's a lot of intel and information in there. If you get stuck, please use them. It took me a long time to write them, okay? Call the police first. As I said, exploitation is a crime. We must be perpetrator focused, okay? If you know that a perpetrator is grooming people, contact the police. That's important. Okay, you can do that on 101, or if it's an emergency, 999. Okay. What will we do with this form once we receive it? Well, we will take it to a daily triage, and you can look at our pathway on the partnership as well. We've got a document on there that kind of shows you what we do with the form. So we will have a multi-agency daily triage discussion, and that's with the exploitation team from Walsall Council. It's with police from Locate, which is our missing officers. It's with police from PPU, which look at sexual crimes, and it's with police from FSID, who look at criminal exploitation crimes. In the future, we're also bringing in a number of other agencies too, such as our partners at Street Teams, our voluntary sector kind of experts around exploitation. And we may, in some instances, invite you to that discussion. So please ensure that all of that information you shared, you've given us your right telephone number, because we will come back to you with the form. We will always try and offer you some feedback on the form and the referral that you've put in. It may take us 24 hours to come back to you. This form is only for exploitation concern. Please do not complete it if you have any of the safeguarding concerns around a victim. So if you're concerned that a child's being neglected, if you're concerned that an adult is being neglected in any way by carers, please do not complete this form. I will send it back to you and ask you to complete a safeguarding form instead, okay? I'm sure many of you won't do that anyway, but just to kind of put that there. The other thing to say is ensure that we're writing about victims, and ensure that your language around that is victim focused, not victim blaming, again, because I will come back to you with some feedback if there's kind of victim blaming language within this assessment tool, okay? So next steps, check the pathway on the website, check any guidance that's with the forms, download the forms and have a look and see what you think. If there's anything in this form that you think that doesn't work for me, or perhaps, you know what, that's a really good idea if we added that in the form, then let us know. Our multi-agency exploitation delivery team will be kind of reviewing this form on a regular basis. So send me an email. My email address is there, katiestoryyoung@walsall.gov.uk, or give me a call, and we can always look to include anything that you think as a practitioner is missing from this form. As I said, the missing exploited children address, the one there is for all victims, regardless of age. And if you do need some support, advice and guidance, that's the email address to use. Thank you very much for spending some time with me today. I hope that made sense, and I will see you soon.